Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel, where we bring timeless stories to life. Have you ever wanted something so badly you could almost taste it, only to find it just out of your reach? What do you do when that happens? Do you admit defeat, or do you find a clever way to make yourself feel better? Today, we're diving into one of Aesop's most famous fables, a story that has been told for thousands of years. Because its lesson is just as relevant today as it was in ancient Greece. It's a tale about desire, effort, and the funny ways our minds work when we don't get what we want. Get comfortable, because we're about to meet a very clever, very proud, and very, very hungry fox. Let's explore the classic story of the fox and the sour grapes. One hot summer's day, a fox was strolling through a beautiful, sun-drenched vineyard. He hadn't eaten all day, and his stomach was rumbling with a mighty grumble. His nose twitched, and his sharp eyes scanned his surroundings, searching for a tasty meal. As he padded silently between the rows of vines, his gaze suddenly locked onto something magnificent. High above his head, dangling from a trellis, was the most perfect bunch of grapes he had ever seen. They were a deep, rich purple, plump and glistening in the sunlight. They looked so ripe and juicy. He could almost feel the sweet juice bursting in his mouth. Ah, he thought to himself, just the thing to quench my thirst and satisfy my hunger. That bunch of grapes has my name written all over it. His mouth began to water. The desire for those grapes was overwhelming. They hung there, a perfect prize, just waiting to be claimed. However, there was a problem, a rather significant one. The trellis they hung from was very high. Far higher than he had first realized. The grapes were tantalizingly close, yet frustratingly far. But it was a simple thing like height going to stop our clever and determined fox? Not a chance. He was known throughout the forest for his cunning and his persistence. He wasn't one to give up easily, especially when such a delicious reward was at stake. So, he crouched down, gathering his strength, his eyes fixed on the prize above. He was ready to give it his all. Taking a few steps back to get a running start, the fox charged forward. He sprang into the air, his paws outstretched, his jaws snapping at the empty space just below the grapes. He landed back on the ground with a soft thud, a little dusty but undeterred. "Humph! A bit higher than I thought," he muttered. "Let's try that again, with a bit more power." He took an even longer run up, this time, his legs pumping like pistons. He leaped with all his might, twisting his body in midair to gain a few extra inches. Again, he missed. The grapes swayed gently, as if teasing him. He tried again, and again, and again. He jumped from different angles. He tried a standing leap. He even tried to scramble up the wooden post of the trellis, but his claws couldn't find a grip. After many attempts, the fox was exhausted. The hot sun beat down on his fur. He was panting heavily, and his muscles ached from the constant jumping. He sat down, his tongue lolling out, and stared up at the grapes. They still looked just as plump and juicy as before, hanging there so effortlessly. A wave of frustration washed over him. He, the cleverest fox in the woods, couldn't reach a simple bunch of grapes. It was infuriating. He had put in so much effort, used all his strength and agility, and yet he had failed. For a creature as proud as our fox, admitting failure was simply not an option. It would be a blow to his ego, a confession that something was beyond his abilities, and that he could not bear. So, as he sat there, tired and defeated, a new thought began to form in his clever mind. A little switch flipped in his brain. He couldn't accept that he wasn't good enough to get the grapes. No, the problem couldn't be with him. The problem must be with the grapes themselves. He stood up, shook the dust from his coat, and looked up at the bunch one last time, but now with a completely different expression. His look of longing was replaced by one of disdain and scorn. He lifted his nose into the air with an air of superiority. He needed a way to protect his wounded pride, a way to walk away feeling like the winner, even though his stomach was still empty. And so, he began to rationalize. He let out a scoff. Theft, he said aloud to no one in particular, but loud enough for the trees and birds to hear. Who would want those grapes anyway? He took a step back, examining them with a critical eye. I'm sure they're sour, he declared confidently. Yes, definitely sour. I can tell just by looking at them. They probably haven't even ripened properly. A wise fox like myself would never eat such common, unripe fruit. They would set my teeth on edge. He nodded to himself, fully convinced by his own argument. The grapes were no longer a desirable prize he couldn't obtain. They were a worthless snack he had wisely chosen to reject. The beautiful purple color was probably a trick of the light, and the plumpness was likely just water, with no real sweetness. Having made up his mind, the fox turned his back on the vineyard and the magnificent bunch of grapes. He flicked his tail dismissively and started to walk away, his head held high. He walked with a proud strut, as if he had just accomplished something great. Though his stomach still rumbled with hunger, his pride was completely intact. In his mind, he hadn't failed at all. He had simply made a smart decision to avoid eating something unpleasant. He had convinced himself that the prize wasn't worth the effort in the first place. And so, the fox went on his way, still hungry, but feeling perfectly clever and satisfied with himself, leaving the sweet, ripe grapes hanging peacefully on the vine. And that brings us to the moral of this famous fable. The story of the fox and the grapes teaches us a powerful lesson about human nature. It's easy to despise what you can't have. When we fail to achieve a goal we desperately wanted, whether it's a promotion, an award, or even a bunch of grapes, it's sometimes easier to pretend that we never really wanted it anyway. We might say it probably would "unna been that great," or better off without it. This is a defense mechanism known as sour grapes. It's a way of protecting our ego from the sting of failure. The fable reminds us to be honest with ourselves about our desires and our shortcomings. It's okay to fail, and it's much better to acknowledge our disappointment than to pretend it doesn't exist, by belittling the goal we could unreach. So, the next time you find yourself dismissing something you once wanted, take a moment to think of our fox. Are the grapes really sour? Or are they just a little too high to reach right now? Recognizing this tendency in ourselves is the first step toward true self-awareness and growth. Thank you so much for joining us for this story. We hope it gave you something to think about. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And do you and I forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. We love sharing these timeless tales with you. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.